to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you from the GB Newsroom. We will be joining Camilla Tominey very shortly. First, though, a look at the top stories at 6 o'clock. More than 20,000 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister in July, hitting that milestone in just 5 months. That is quicker than during Rishi Sunak's time in number 10, where it took 8.5 months to reach the same figure. However, the Prime Minister accused the Conservatives of opening the borders, he said, and promised to cut the numbers after record-high asylum costs also emerged, reaching £5 billion. It also comes as 50 people have now died attempting the journey this year, making 2024 the deadliest year on record. The assisted dying bill could soon hit a roadblock, with some backers already reconsidering their support just days after the historic vote in the Commons this week. Concerns over palliative care and safeguarding have reignited the debate, with MPs set to propose amendments when the bill moves to its committee stage. Pat McFadden says there's a long road ahead. Well, the Cabinet Minister spoke to us earlier here on GB News.
Parliament's voted on that on Friday. It will go into committee. It will be considered in much more detail now, like every other piece of legislation, and it should be because it's such a serious issue. And the House of Commons will have to vote on it again in a few months' time. So this bill, this big and serious measure, will be properly and fully considered clause by clause now, as it should be. And even though we had the vote on Friday, I still think there's probably a long way to go before this becomes law.
Well, Pat McFadden also suggested questions over the cost of assisted dying plans could be part of the next phase of the debate. The Conservatives' Victoria Atkins, who voted in favour of the bill this week, says it is now important to keep the conversation going.
We saw across the House, from both those who voted aye, but also those who voted no, there was, for example, a real wish to see conversations about palliative care and the quality of palliative care continue. I think we also saw many heartbreaking examples And there'll be, viewers at home that have been personally affected by this, where they just want to see whether the law can get into a better place than it is at the moment.
In other news, Gregg Wallace has hit back at claims of misconduct, accusing middle-class women of a certain age, he said, of driving allegations against him. The MasterChef presenter stepped down on Thursday as accusations of inappropriate comments emerged, made over 17 years. They're now being investigated. Well, TV star Kirsty Allsopp and singer Rod Stewart are among those sharing some of the allegations, with Allsopp calling his behaviour totally unprofessional. Production company Banijay UK has urged anyone with concerns to come forward as the investigation continues, though Gregg Wallace himself denies the allegations, saying that he's worked with thousands of contestants during his career and has nothing to hide. A 34-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of rape at the Groucho Club in Soho in London. The arrest took place on Saturday night at an address in Hertfordshire, according to the Metropolitan Police. At this stage, the force says there's no suggestion that any employees of the club were involved. Well, the Groucho, a private members venue popular with celebrities in London, had its licence suspended earlier this week following a request by the Met Police. The woman who reported the incident is now being supported by specialist officers. 2 teenagers have been charged following a suspected chemical attack at a Surbiton station in southwest London on Friday. The 14 and 16-year-olds, who can't be named for legal reasons, are accused of possessing a corrosive substance in a public place. Officers approached the boys just after 4 o'clock and were exposed to an alkaline substance, with 2 of them taken to hospital, though they have since been discharged. 7 others, though, including 2 from the Metropolitan Police, were also checked by paramedics. The teenagers will both appear at Wimbledon Magistrates Court tomorrow. A police investigation is underway in Belfast after the sudden death of a woman believed to be in her 20s at a nightclub. Emergency services were called in the early hours of this morning after reports that 2 women had fallen unconscious. One of them was found dead at the scene while the other remains in hospital. Officers are now urging anyone with information to come forward as their inquiries in Belfast continue. Dozens of homes have been evacuated in Wales after a sinkhole believed to be up to 60 feet deep appeared at the bottom of a local resident's driveway in Merthyr Tydfil. Residents say they heard rumbling and collapsing overnight, fearing their homes could be swallowed. The sinkhole is believed to have been triggered by a collapsed culvert just days after heavy rain from Storm Bert brought flooding. South Wales Police and fire and rescue crews have been on site throughout the day, with authorities there warning people to stay away as more rain could threaten to make the situation worse. And it has been a mild weekend across much of the UK, with highs of up to 16 degrees for some, but sorry to tell you, it's about to come to an abrupt end. Temperatures are expected to plunge to as low as -7 in Scotland tomorrow, with frost, ice and freezing fog on the way. The Met Office is also warning that rain moving in from the west into the rest of this week could turn to snow on higher ground, causing disruption for many. Those are the latest headlines for now. Your next update at 7 o'clock. Now, though, it's over to Camilla Tominey.
Good morning and welcome to a Christmassy Camilla Tominey show on GB News. I hope you like the Christmas trees and the festive spirit on December the 1st. Well, what a week we've witnessed with the assisted dying vote and Labour's first cabinet resignation. Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, will be joining me. I'm going to be asking him about the departure of Transport Secretary Louise Haigh. I'm also going to be speaking to Shadow Environment Secretary Victoria Atkins. She'll be live with me. I'll ask her about why she supported the assisted dying bill. Former Home Secretary Alan Johnson will be with me to talk about his new book on Harold Wilson. And, of course, I'll also be talking to him about what's been a tricky first few months for Labour in power. The pollster Scarlett Maguire will join me in the studio to reflect on the latest Ipsos poll that's found that Nigel Farage is the most popular politician in the UK today. I'm joined now by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden. Mr McFadden, I just want to play you a quote from Keir Starmer that comes from May 2022. This was the midst of the Partygate scandal. Just have a listen.
The value symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office and the democracy that it represents.
You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker, Mr. McFadden. So can I ask, what on earth Keir Starmer, as a former Director of Public Prosecutions, was thinking in appointing a convicted fraudster to his cabinet?
Well, that quote that you played, I think, was probably in the middle of Partygate, when the Prime Minister and indeed the Chancellor of the day were being fined at that time for things they did in office for breaking the law. What we've never said is that someone who has some past conviction which is now spent can never serve in Parliament. That's never been the case. Now, I don't know the exact conversations that took place last Thursday between Louise Haigh and Keir Starmer. The upshot is that she has resigned and we've got a new Transport Secretary. But the clip that you played me there was about law breaking while serving in office. That's what he was talking about during that clip.
Well, if it's not a problem to have a lawbreaker serving in office, why has she had to resign? We understand from both her team and indeed Downing Street that Keir Starmer was aware of this conviction when she was appointed to Cabinet. So was it OK for Keir Starmer to know privately, but then problematic for people to know publicly that this had happened? What changed?
Well, I don't, as I say, I'm not party to the conversations that took place last Thursday between Louise Haigh and the Prime Minister when this story came to light. There may have been some new information there, I don't know. But the result of that was that Louise Haigh decided to resign late on Thursday night. She said in her resignation letter she didn't want this to go on and be a long drawn out saga, a distraction for the government, as she put it. And I think that's quite a contrast between the way this was dealt with and the way some of these things have been dealt with in the past, where they have dragged out, they have become a big distraction. But here we are a couple of days on from it. She has resigned. I'm sorry to see her go. Louise Haigh was a good colleague. But we have a new Transport Secretary in place now, Heidi Alexander, who I think will do a really good job.
But this suggests that this has only happened, that her resignation and conversations have only taken place because the story ended up in the media. So what it speaks to is this idea that the Prime Minister has one set of morals which he puts on display publicly, but privately a whole different set of values. And we saw this with Donagate, didn't we? This sort of idea of Keir Starmer on one hand being morally upstanding, criticising Boris Johnson and others for impropriety in office, while secretly taking donations from Lord Ali, making sure that Sue Gray had sorted him out with a Downing Street pass. So it's one thing in public and another thing in private. In what world does this make you any different from the past Conservative administration that you spent months and years criticising?
I think the equivalence you're drawing there doesn't stack up at all. The previous Conservative administration were breaking the rules in Parliament to defend somebody who'd been guilty of breaking the lobbying rules. They wasted billions on COVID fraud and waste, and they organised a series of parties while telling the rest of the country they had to stay indoors and live a very strict lifestyle at the time. So I don't accept there's equivalence between these things. And when you look, as I say, at the speed with which this was dealt with on Thursday compared to all the inquiries and everything that we had to have with some of those past things, it's much faster. It shows that he wants to act on these things.
Act on his own mistakes?
When they come to light.
Why did he appoint a convicted fraudster to Cabinet? Why did he do that? He's a former Director of Public Prosecutions.
Look, I'm not party to everything that's been disclosed at every stage of this. I don't think this is just a matter, as you put it a wee minute ago, of it becoming something in the press. But whatever the conversations have been, however the information has come out, in the end, she's resigned now. We've got a new
but the other
transport
problem,
secretary, and we'll carry on with the transport agenda.
But this is the other thing. OK, you don't know why he decided to promote a convicted fraudster to cabinet. Fair enough. But a convicted fraudster was promoted to cabinet without the public being told. How on earth can this be presented as more honest and decent politics? He stood on the steps of Downing Street promising change, promising a higher moral tone. He's promoted a convicted fraudster to cabinet and not told the public. The public's only found out thanks to the Times and Sky News.
Well, look, as I say, I don't know exactly what was disclosed at every stage of this, so I'm not sure.
Nothing was disclosed to the public. The public found out this week.
The upshot is she's resigned.
Right.
Yes, the public found out this week, but what I'm saying is before that, I don't know what was disclosed at every stage of this. The important thing is we have a new Transport Secretary in place. OK, look,
let's look at Labour's record in office so far. We've got removing pensioners' winter fuel allowance whilst giving train drivers 15%. We now find out that the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall's been claiming 350 quid a month in energy costs for her Leicestershire home. Presumably a lot of you are doing that. We'll have to consider the morality of that itself. We've had Donagate, we've had Rosie Duffield resigning, we've had the Chagos Islands handed back to Mauritius and huge controversy. We've had Sue Gray, Chief of Staff, resigning after it was revealed that she had given donor Lord Ali a pass to Downing Street. We've had the employers' NIC contributions increased, a broken manifesto promise if ever there was one. We've had suggestions that the Chancellor has lied on her CV. We've had IHT applied to farmers and a massive protest in Parliament. And now we've had Louise Haig's resignation. Can we be honest, Mr McFadden? You've been in politics a long, long time. This has been an absolutely disastrous start to the Labour administration, hasn't it?
Not at all. We've had a good increase in the minimum
Mr.
wage.
McFadden.
We've had more help for carers. We've had a freeze in the fuel duty. We've protected the pay slips of people as we said we would in our manifesto. We've had a lot to sort out. You're right. Had to sort out a collapsing prison system. We're having to start to get the NHS waiting list down. We've got legislation going through on transport that we talked about earlier. We've got a big agenda, and this week we're going to take that forward with a new plan for change, setting out key priorities in health, in education, in living standards, in energy, in safety on our streets, so that the public know exactly what the priorities are after the big budget that we had just a few weeks ago. That's going to be a good plan for the country. It's also going to change the way that the state works, because we've got to be doing that too, so that we get value for money and deliver for the British public.
But Mr McFadden, you've mentioned there huge waiting lists in the NHS. You've said that the police system is broken. We've heard in the past your rhetoric around the prison service being broken as well. And in your infinite wisdom, you decide that this is a good time to legalise assisted dying, with all those different institutions on their knees.
Well, this was a private member's bill brought forward, and I think we should treat this very seriously. You know, I was there in the vote on Friday. I saw how seriously people were taking this, whether they were for it or against it. There has been a debate going on about this in the country for some years. It was brought forward through a private member's bill. Now that Parliament's voted on that on Friday, it will go into committee. It will be considered in much more detail now, like every other piece of legislation, and it should be, because it's such a serious issue. And the House of Commons will have to vote on it again in a few months' time. So this bill, this big and serious measure, will be properly and fully considered clause by clause now, as it should be. And even though we had the vote on Friday, I still think there's probably a long way to go before this becomes law.
Well, one wonders why it had to be so rushed through. This has been something that's been debated for years and years and years. Comparatively, Parliament spent 700 hours discussing and debating banning hunting with dogs. We've got assisted dying now set to be legalised on the basis of 5 hours of debate. Even if you look over to Australia, where there are comparatively far, far fewer MPs, they debated assisted dying through the night for more than a week. What was the urgency here?
Well, it won't just be 5 hours because it now goes into committee for 4 months, where it will be considered clause by clause, as it should be for a measure like this. Parliament will vote again and debate it again after that period, probably May or June next year, something around that time, and then it will all have to be done again in the House of Lords. So it won't be rushed, it will be fully and properly considered. And as I say, even though the House of Commons voted for it on Friday, I still think the bill's got a lot of parliamentary stages and a lot of things to consider before it fully becomes law.
All right. Mr. McFadden, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Really grateful for you coming on. Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins. Are the Tories doing enough to ward off the threat from reform? This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Don't go anywhere.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Bansky's Girl with Balloon is arguably one of the artist's most recognisable images. So when a limited edition print signed by the artist was stolen from Grove Gallery in London, an investigation was launched by the Metropolitan Police's flying squad. The work was thankfully retrieved. The desire to own great works of art has once again become evident this week, albeit a little further afield on the continent. Police in Italy have uncovered a criminal network forging artworks by Bansky, Andy Warhol, Pablo Picasso and others. Investigators said that they've seized more than 2,100 fake pieces of art with a potential market value of about £165 million. With me to discuss that case is the Chief Executive of Grove Gallery, James Ryan.
The art world needs to tighten up. It is known as a bit of a Wild West out there because people will try and chance it with these forgeries. You're quite right, there's only one actual original, but even auction houses have been hoodwinked before.
The burglary that you suffered is sub judice, so we have to be careful what we say about it. But it must have been a bit of a shock to you. I mean, was it a broken window, a smashed door?
At 10, 11 o'clock at night and just hammer straight through, shoulder barging through the door and then in and out, you know, gone in 60 seconds. I must say, I know...
Obviously, that targeted attack, the person would have known what he or she was after. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I must say, I know they cop a lot of, flack, the police force, but the flying squad got the artwork back within 3 days. They were fantastic. So, yeah, I've never heard or seen, other than the Thomas Crown Affair type film, I just didn't think it'd be happening to little old me, in Fitzrovia, but it did, and thankfully we got it back.
GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm delighted to be joined now by the Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning.
Now, you supported the assisted dying bill.
Thank you so much.
Were you confident that that bill had enough debate time? 5 hours? I made the point earlier that Parliament spent over 600 hours debating banning fox hunting. 5 hours on such a monumental decision?
Well, thank you, Camilla. And for me personally, I appreciate this is a very delicate subject and there'll be a range of views on this. But for me personally, I had not only listened to the debate on Friday, but actually had years of conversations with constituents about this very delicate matter. I read all of my correspondence that I was sent ahead of the debate on Friday, and I listened to some of the debate as well before arriving at the conclusion that I did, which was to vote for the bill, actually because I want the debate to continue. You know, this is the first stage of this bill process. There'll be a lot of scrutiny, and there are some, you know, real questions I think that those who support the bill must answer, including, as I've said from my constituents, the concerns about the Canadian model and so on. And through that scrutiny, we will see if those questions can be answered to adequately and well enough such that the bill will receive the support of MPs like me at third reading. But there's a long process to go before we reach that stage.
Is there something slightly anti-Conservative about supporting this bill? You know, the Conservatives are meant to conserve things, including life.
Yeah, look, I actually think this is a subject that certainly the public believe, and I have to say I agree with them. I think, you know, party lines on this or party political boundaries don't apply in this really important issue. I think we saw across the House from both those who voted aye, but also those who voted no, there was, for example, a real wish to see conversations about palliative care and the quality of palliative care continue. I think we also saw many heartbreaking examples. And there'll be, you know, viewers at home that have been personally affected by this, where they just want to see whether the law can get into a better place than it is at the moment. And that's why I voted, as I say, it was because I want this debate to continue. I was worried that if, and this is just my view, as I say, I'm not for a moment judging anyone else, but I wanted to be able to let the debate continue. And we will have that debate and we'll see what happens through scrutiny and see what happens at third reading. But I think the fact that we're now having this conversation is actually really important. And I wish that it wouldn't take just a piece of legislation for us to be able to have this conversation as a country.
OK, let's just move on to a story in the front of the Mail on Sunday today about Liz Kendall, who's the Work and Pensions Secretary. It's saying that it's hypocritical for Labour to be stripping pensioners of their winter fuel allowance while claiming back from the taxpayer the cost of energy bills at their second homes. Now, I appreciate that all MPs are entitled to do this, and that's been a standard convention for some time. Nigel Farage, however, has said, in light of what's happened to pensioners' winter fuel, that as an MP, he won't be claiming any money back from the taxpayer for fuel bills at his second home near Clacton. Is that something that you think the Tories should emulate? Because I looked at that this morning and I thought that's quite a strong attack line. Once again, we're getting Reform positioning itself as the main opposition here and not the Tories.
Oh, I don't think that's the case at all. Sadly, the Reform Party had the impact that we have lost many excellent, hard-working Conservative MPs from this Parliament, which means that we have this Labour supermajority. So my message to voters loud and clear is if you're as sick of this government as I already am, then please help us as Conservatives defeat them at the next election. But if I may just go on this broader theme of hypocrisy of this government, my goodness me, there's a lot to go on, isn't there? You know, we've had the front page today, as you say, of a government that is removing this allowance from vulnerable pensioners who may be on an income of 13 or 14,000. They are expecting them to stump up the money for that. We know that's going to have a very real impact on some of our most vulnerable pensioners, but also the hypocrisy about the family farm tax.
But do you claim for fuel? Do you claim back for fuel?
We are forcing. I'm sorry, if I may, just on the family farm tax. I am.
No, quickly on this, because we're running out of time.
Family farm tax. All right, I do want to talk about the family farm tax, if I may. So we are forcing Labour into the chamber on Wednesday, to get them to decide whether they are going to back our British farmers or suck up to Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in terms of the family farm tax. In terms of allowances,
on energy bills,
I haven't historically claimed for it.
Should MPs
claim for it?
You haven't historically, but would you recommend that your colleagues, if you're going to start attacking Labour on winter fuel, answer me this question just to conclude, shouldn't all MPs, if they're stripping pensioners of their winter fuel, just say, we won't claim back any of our energy costs at all?
So I think the much more effective way to fight this policy, rather than allowing a minority party leader to make these claims, is to work as an effective opposition to this Labour government and draw out all of the problems with their budget. They have a problem with the massive hike in national insurance that they are putting on employers. That's going to have a huge impact across the board, including with job losses. We should look at the family farm tax, the hypocrisy of the reports this weekend in the papers of a Labour MP's own family arranging their affairs in such a way just ahead of the budget so that we believe they won't be eligible, they won't have to pay this inheritance tax on their own family estates. The hypocrisy of assuming other people will pay for their clothes, as we saw with the cash for pants scandal over the summer. That's how we hold this government to account. And I'm not really interested in headlines by another one of your co-presenters, Camilla, to be honest.
Yeah, but my main central question is this. Conservative politicians cannot possibly accuse Labour politicians of hypocrisy in claiming back money from the taxpayer for fuel at second homes while stripping pensioners of their winter fuel allowance. So I'm saying to you, your colleagues should follow Farage's example and your own and not claim back any energy bills.
I'm sorry, no Conservative will ever follow Mr Farage. The fact is that the reason this is in the news is because of Labour's decision to remove winter fuel payments from pensioners. That is the mischief. That's what we are all trying to get Labour to reconsider on, and that's why we forced the vote on Labour MPs. So it's that hypocrisy that we are focused on, and I'm not, as I say, I'm afraid I'm not going to take Mr Farage's lead in anything.
Fine, forget Farage. I'm asking you this question. Should MPs claim back money from the taxpayer for their fuel bills, yes or no?
I think so. In answer to this,
yes or no?
It's not for me to decide how.
Yes or no?
No, Camilla, forgive me. I'm not accepting the premise of the question. It is for individual MPs to decide their expenses claims, what they're prepared to claim for. What I will say, however, is that we as Conservatives are the effective opposition to this budget of broken promises, and we are working very, very hard to hold this government to account. But we need people to join us so that we can hold them to account, and I hope beat them at the next election. That's how we get this back. That's how we correct this terrible circumstance of this Labour government.
Victoria Atkins, thank you very much. I know you've been battling with some sound issues, so I thank you for your patience. Thank you very much indeed.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. There's been plenty of showers around for many of us this weekend, but it will be turning colder as we head into the start of the new working week. That's all thanks to this area of low pressure moving away towards Scandinavia, leaving northerly winds across the UK as we head into the start of Monday and Tuesday. Back to the rest of Sunday though, plenty of showers around, these clearing their way eastwards as we head through the evening and turning increasingly to sleet and snow across northern parts of Scotland, particularly over any high ground. Further south and further east, we will see some clearer spells developing during the early hours, and for most of us, it'll be a much colder night than we've seen recently. Only 3 or 4 degrees across parts of Scotland and only around 6 or 7 degrees across much of England and Wales. So quite a chilly start across parts of Scotland during Monday morning, perhaps some ice around in places, so do take care during Monday morning's rush hour. But we'll see those sleet and snow showers continuing across the far north as we go through Monday daytime. Across Northern Ireland, there will still be some showers around, these likely falling as rain for most places. And across northern parts of England, quite a cloudy and damp start to the day. But for the rest of England and Wales, generally a drier and brighter start to the day, albeit some scattered showers across western areas. That area of showery rain across northern parts of England continues to sink its way southwards in towards Monday afternoon, and we'll still see those sleet and snow showers across parts of Scotland into the afternoon as well. But for most of us, it should be turning a little bit drier through the afternoon, with plenty of sunshine and blue skies on offer, and feeling much colder than we've seen recently. Only 10 or 11 degrees in the south and 5 or 6 further north, and with some brisk northerly winds across the eastern coast, feeling colder still. A cold start to Tuesday as well, quite a widespread frost across the UK, but turning increasingly cloudy from the west as we see this weather front pushing its way eastwards into the afternoon, likely to turn to sleet and snow over hills in the north. Further wet and windy weather is likely through Wednesday and Thursday, and we'll see those temperatures on the rise too, back to around, if not above average for the time of year.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by Alan Johnson, former Home Secretary and Health Secretary under the last Labour government, who has written a fascinating new book about Harold Wilson. Alan, lovely to see you on this Sunday morning. Now, you've said of Wilson, let me just quote, "I believe that Harold Wilson, son of an industrial chemist and born near Huddersfield, was the greatest Prime Minister in this country's history." Why do you say that, Alan? That's quite a claim.
Did I say that?
You did say that. You said because of his unknown intellect and extraordinary achievements.
Yeah. I thought I was asked to name the greatest Labour Prime Minister. But, do you know, I defend Harold, particularly after writing the book, because I wasn't aware, and I know, Camilla, you've read the book recently because we talked about it when we were together on Wednesday. It's a short read. It's 30,000 words. That's what I was commissioned for. And when you distill and précis Wilson's career into 30,000 words, you realise just how amazingly successful he was. In terms of his record in government, you just have to look at those huge advances in the 1960s, not just the legalisation of homosexuality. Alan Turing, the great war hero, was chemically castrated by the state for being homosexual just 13 years before Wilson changed the law. Not just about decriminalising abortion, not just the first Race Relations Act to protect ethnic minorities against the terrible prejudice that they experienced, just a small change to the divorce laws. So many people, mainly women, trapped in unhappy marriages because it virtually took a court case to actually change the situation. You virtually had to prove unfaithfulness or whatever. And he introduced the concept of irretrievable breakdown. And a whole series of other measures. I mean, I could argue, this is not, seeing as you put that tantalising prospect forward, Churchill was a great prime minister, and he was the perfect prime minister for the war. You have to search to find out anything Churchill did on the domestic front that's even remotely comparable to Wilson, because basically Churchill left that to others. He left education to Butler. So in
Alan,
terms
you
of,
could say he was quite busy. He didn't have the luxury in office of not having to take on Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. On the other hand, with Harold Wilson, he's an intriguing figure, isn't he? Because the left don't seem to want to laud him as they have somebody like Clement Attlee. And second of all, you describe him as this great moderniser, very progressive in his thinking and his politics. And yet there's a contradiction there because he's pipe smoking, he's a traditionalist, he famously got on very well with the late Queen Elizabeth II. Why don't the left celebrate Wilson more?
A very good question. Why don't we all celebrate Wilson more? I mean, he ended his period in office. He'd won 4 elections, only matched by Gladstone. He'd won a European referendum, the first plebiscite we'd ever had in this country, not matched by David Cameron. But he left under this cloud, which was partly about something called the Lavender List and his relationship with Marcia Williams, his political secretary, but also because he had a reputation of being slippery. And if you think about that European debate, he upset the left because there was a clear Labour conference decision, 10-1, to just pull out of Europe if we won the 74 election. And on the right, Roy Jenkins, Tony Crossland, etc., said, why are you withdrawing from Europe? We're members now. You applied to be a member in the 60s when de Gaulle famously said no. So he upset the left and the right and knew that's what he'd do through the referendum. And that's just an example of Wilson's mastery of the political skills that got the country into the right place, I would argue, but left plenty of enemies on left and right, not just his political enemies in the House of Commons, but within the Labour Party.
All right. So we've discussed Wilson's genius, and you, of course, are closely associated with both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. How do you think, Alan, the current Labour Prime Minister is shaping up against his predecessors? It hasn't been the easiest 4 months for Keir Starmer. I think that much we must admit. Pat McFadden didn't want to admit it earlier on the show, but can you and I agree on that?
Yeah, it's not been a brilliant start, but I'll judge Keir Starmer after at least 4 years, maybe 5. I'm pleased that money's going into health, and I'm pleased that money's going into education. I'm pleased that they're closing off a tax loophole, let's face it, where bankers could buy land to escape inheritance tax. I'm pleased about. I don't think I should be getting the winter fuel allowance. I don't think Nigel Farage should. I think a payment for 80, it's supposed to be a measure to counter poverty. 80% of the recipients are nowhere near being in poverty, and they're getting a lump of taxpayers' money. The context of it was strange because it appeared from nowhere, and I think some of those problems that Keir Starmer and the new government have faced are about that. They've seen pretty strange decisions and they surprised people, and there's been a kind of difficulty in putting those arguments across.
Just to push back on a couple of those points, you could argue in the case of farmers that actually it's going to affect farmers with far less wealth in assets than had been intended. And on the winter fuel allowance, you could say, well, hang on a minute, it might be affecting pensioners like, for instance, Nigel Farage, who I think is younger than you're giving him credit for, Alan, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe.
But,
maybe.
It may be affecting pensioners on 14 grand a year. That isn't somebody who has got a lot of spare cash. But moving on from your point, why has this all gone wrong? You're saying some good ideas but bad execution. Is Starmer just not a very good politician? I see his approval rating, as you mentioned, the Reform leader there. It's dipped and dipped and dipped since he took office. Farage is now more popular than the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think what most people feel is it's better than what went before. That landslide election victory for Labour didn't come out of nowhere. It came out after 14 years of the most disastrous, incompetent governments anyone in this country has ever seen. Now, in terms of your fundamental question, there are always arguments for and against. Of course there are. The winter fuel allowance, I was in Department for Work and Pensions when we introduced pension credit 4 years after the winter fuel allowance. But pension credit was about tackling poverty. The winter fuel allowance was a very temporary arrangement. But there are no easy decisions in politics. If you come into government with the economy in such a mess, you have to make decisions that are going to hurt people. And in opposition, I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday in Hull. In opposition, we love to say, we're not frightened of taking hard decisions. And then as soon as you take a hard decision, you start to run away from it and not defend that decision. I think the decision on inheritance tax was tough. There'll be Farmers who'll be adversely affected by that, yes. I think the decision on winter fuel allowance was tough. I think there will be pensioners who will feel that, although the increase in people claiming pension credit is absolutely very, that will deal with pensioner poverty, not the winter fuel allowance. But in all these cases, there are no easy options. That's what being in government is about. And lots of my colleagues on the Labour benches quite enjoyed opposition because you just blame the government for everything. Now they're finding after 13 years just how tough government is, particularly to bring about the changes that Labour are looking to bring about, to properly fund our public services, to ensure that we get people back into work. All of that is going to be tough, and there's no easy decisions there.
All right. Alan Johnson, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Your book on Harold Wilson is out now. Thank you very much for appearing on GB News. Good to see you.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The way in which children are being driven online because we're not taking them seriously offline. And what we're tending to do is seeing the problems entirely on the social media, forgetting the fact that we've given up on children being able to work independently and play independently outdoors. We've basically created a world where the digital bedroom has become this go-to area for a lot of young kids. We've given up on old-fashioned parenting, where we try to cultivate their resilience. And now we blame everything, all the problems that occur online. You have to remember that if you take something like bullying, bullying doesn't have to only take place online. It happens all the time, offline, in everyday life. But yet we only see the problem on the social media, and there's this obsession with the social media where every single problem that afflicts childhood is blamed on it. And that distracts us from actually understanding what we're doing wrong with children. So for me, and I hate when I see children with digital technology, when I see them with smartphones. I'm not a fan. I'm much more concerned about the fact that parents use their digital phones when they're having dinner with their kids and giving very bad examples in relation to that. But the real problem, it seems to me, is offline, and that's why we've got to crack the issue. So for me, the banning issue is entirely a headline-grabbing political gambit. And I think that we should be much more focused on the real problems rather than delude ourselves that anything will improve.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Pollster extraordinaire Scarlett Maguire is in the studio. I describe you as that because your company, JL Partners, were the only ones to closely predict the Trump victory. So well done to you, because most of the US pollsters were way off
Yeah, that's
Little
right.
UK firm gets it right. We'll get on to American matters in just a moment. I'm intrigued by this Ipsos poll. I know it's a rival. You will have done your own polling, but about approval ratings of party leaders. And we've got Farage now, apparently more popular than the PM, Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey. Reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've seen in our own polling as well. And there's sort of two ways that you can look at popularity. You can look at net popularity, so the balance of how many people like them compared to how many people dislike them, in which case Farage is ahead of Starmer. In fact, every politician we tested is ahead of Starmer currently, but still behind the likes of Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey. But I think that's more because the public don't know them yet, because you have many more people answering don't know. But if you look at just how many people like them, then yes, that is correct, more people like Farage.
I mean, it's harsh to kind of make the comparison to Badenoch at this stage because she's untried and untested, but she needs to get in a hurry to get more recognition and more kind of profile, because you've got Farage there. He just surpassed the 2 million followers on TikTok mark. He's instantly recognisable, obviously has this channel as a platform, etc., etc. Just moving on to reform, purely because I was at their press conference on Thursday and I wrote my column about it in the Telegraph yesterday. You know, they are on the rise. You've got the situation. Have I extrapolated this data correctly? I hope so, because we put it in print. You know, there was a compendium of all of the council by-elections that have happened since the general election. And that does seem to suggest that support for Labour, so I think Labour are about 10% down, Conservatives are flatlined, Lib Dems have gained like 1%, Greens have gone down, maybe the Greens went to the Lib Dems. Seems to me that Labour support is shifting to reform. Have I analysed that correctly?
So, yes, but the council by-elections are an interesting case. If you had a Labour person here talking, they'd be saying we're not worried about council by-elections. Hardly anyone votes in them. They're very low turnout and they're a very different sort of electorate. And, crucially, they're not voting on who occupies number 10. I think with that caveat, though, it has been very interesting to see that reform look like they have been making gains. Labour has definitely been doing very badly in these council by-elections, which is quite striking for a government that is so new into office and elected on such a big landslide. But I think what they point to, which will be much more interesting, is the local elections in May, which I think are a huge test for Labour, but actually probably more importantly for reform.
Yes, because he's been saying that he wants to emulate Paddy Ashdown, have this situation where reform is both professionalised but has as many local branches as they can get. They're saying that they want to build grassroots into a local political movement, then into a national political movement. So he has said that they need to be winning hundreds of seats come May. At this stage, appreciate it's early days, although time is ticking. We now have a Christmas tree in the studio. What are the chances of reform performing that well in May next year?
So I don't know about reform's internal operations, and that will be absolutely crucial when it comes to the May elections. Obviously, they say they're working on building that up so that they have the sort of activists on the grounds and the methods they need to be able to get out that vote. But putting that to the side, I think one thing you can say, whether reform are able to meet this, the public opinion is ripe for a sort of reform challenge, so an anti-establishment, anti-politics challenge to the mainstream parties. That's what the electorate is currently looking for. Whether reform can meet them in the locals, that's a question that we'll see in May, but the conditions are certainly right for it.
Do you agree with John Curtis, the polling professor, who has suggested that we are in the grip of Britain's two largest parties on the affections of the electorate, never looking weaker? He's basically saying that because so many people didn't vote for Labour and, in fact, put their vote elsewhere, in fact, 42% of the electorate voted for someone other than the Labour Party, that we're now looking at a situation where that two-party system seems to be kaput. I mentioned earlier, Reform press release comes in suggesting that now they're level pegging with Labour in Wales against Plaid Cymru, which is interesting, isn't it? They've overtaken the Tories in Wales.
Oh, I think Wales will actually be a hugely... There was a great piece in The Spectator this week about the reform threat to both Labour and actually the Conservative standing, what they have of it in Wales. And I think Wales is a really interesting testing ground for reform. They came second in the general election, even just passed. And I really think they could build on that success, especially in Labour's deindustrialised heartlands. But I think to the point more generally about the two-party system, that's actually something that I've been thinking, not even just now, but during the election campaign itself. itself. The result, I think, validated that. Only 2 in 10 of the eligible electorate voted for Labour because turnout was so low, and they only won 33% of the sort of 60% turnout. So you're looking at a system where there was no enthusiasm for the main parties. It was very clear. And when you asked people, both in focus groups and in polls, they were voting for change.
Yes.
If people don't feel like they're getting that change, then the obvious answer is to look outside those mainstream parties. And I think we're looking at an electorate that looks much more sort of European than what we've been seeing happening in Europe, but that is currently constrained by first past the post.
Yes.
But I have a feeling we'll see that sort of disintegrate by the time it gets to the next election, and those sort of barriers and the guardrails that first past the post puts in place against these sort of anti-establishment or third-party threats, I think will come through, especially if we're looking at a situation that we've seen over the last few weeks where no party is polling above 30%.
It's intriguing, isn't it, for the Labour Party to have such a big majority on the back of such a loveless landslide. Let's move over to America. I mean, what lessons can we learn from what happened with the recent election on November the 5th? Why did the Democrats lose so badly, do you think, Scarlett?
I think the first thing is to say is about Joe Biden. He was a terrible candidate for re-election and should not have stayed on the ticket as long as he did. That did a huge amount of damage to the Democrats' standing with their own voters as well as with independent voters and with everyone else. And so I think it was always going to be a very difficult job for someone else to take over. I think there was quite a lot of artificial optimism from the Democrats after that happened, because they had they thought they had a candidate that could string a sentence together. Actually, that didn't turn out to be the case either. And I think Harris was a bad candidate. The issues were working against them. People have been reacting against incumbents across the globe, but in America they were particularly cross about inflation, the cost of living and immigration. And they judged the Democrats poorly on that record. And so I think when you put those things together, in hindsight, it looked obvious that, I mean, obviously we were saying that Trump was going to win, but in hindsight, it looks obvious that Trump was going to win.
Yes. It was almost as if the lie around Joe Biden's fitness for office extended to Harris. Everyone was sort of making out that she was a better politician than she was. She was the kind of like least popular vice president in recent memory.
Well, I think it did do something to neutralise. So the Democrats by the end fell back on the campaign being you can't vote for Trump because of his character, abortion rights, and also this idea that Trump was a threat to democracy. Now, I think that sort of central plank of the Democrats' campaign was hugely undermined by the fact that lots of voters actually thought the threat to democracy was happening under the Democrats by the end, because of what was going on around Joe Biden's age and because of what they weren't being told about it.
And quick question to finish. When it comes to a right-wing politician in this country trying to emulate Trump, who is most likely in your mind at the moment, looking at all the figures, to be successful? Farage or Badenoch?
It's a good question. I think it depends which direction Badenoch chooses to go. I think the best way for Conservatives to think about the threat to reform is not to think of it on a left-right spectrum, but to think of it as a question of authenticity and that challenge to the establishment. If Kemi Badenoch can mount that, then it's hers. But otherwise, I think it looks like Farage.
All right.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. There's been plenty of showers around for many of us this weekend, but it will be turning colder as we head into the start of the new working week. That's all thanks to this area of low pressure moving away towards Scandinavia, leaving northerly winds across the UK as we head into the start of Monday and Tuesday. Back to the rest of Sunday, though, plenty of showers around, these clearing their way eastwards as we head through the evening and turning increasingly to sleet and snow across northern parts of Scotland, particularly over any high ground. Further south and further east, we will see some clearer spells developing during the early hours, and for most of us, it'll be a much colder night than we've seen recently.